News Center Maine is partnering with the Maine-Monitor to bring you some of the reporting being done by journalists at the nonprofit independent publication. We will be featuring one of their stories each Monday, and today we're taking a look at abortion. Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, many people have been pushing to change abortion laws. A new report from the Maine-Monitor says there is a growing group of people known as abortion abolitionists. They look to ban abortion on religious grounds, even advocate for criminals penalties for women who get abortions. So here to talk more about them and their influence in Maine is Sean Scott with the Maine-Monitor. Sean, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start with this. What is abortion abolition and what makes it different from just the pro-life movement?
Yeah, so abolition is a subset of the anti-abortion movement. It is more religious than the kind of pro-life sect. Pro-life advocates will often talk in terms of constitutional rights or civil rights for the fetus. They talk about fetal personhood, but abortion abolition is explicitly religious, explicitly Christian, and they advocate for total bans of abortion as opposed to regulations. They see regulations as kind of half measures, and they also advocate for criminalization for both abortion providers and women who receive abortions.
How did the abolition movement get started in Maine, and what does it look like now?
Yeah, so it goes back to 2023 when the state passed a law expanding abortion access. Some of the advocates who were against that bill, in particular Josh Whitney is one of the people who I talked to, they started to feel that in advocating against that bill, they were advocating for what they saw as an arbitrary line for when abortion was and wasn't allowed. And they viewed kind of the more consistent stance as we need a total ban. So Josh Whitney, along with a couple of other pastors and organizers, started what's now known as King's Coalition for Abolition. It's a pretty small group, but they do advocate for total abortion bans. They actually advocated against some of the bills that were trying to regulate abortion in this past session, and they also do some preaching outside.
That said, what impact has this movement had so far on politics here in Maine?
Yeah, there are a couple of different ways that it's impacted politics in Maine. The first is kind of rhetorical. John Andrade is a street preacher. He's outside the Planned Parenthood in Portland a lot, and he kind of embraces abortion abolition rhetoric. So you'll see in like the signs that he holds, it compares the fetus in the womb to American slavery on his signs. And that's kind of the rhetoric that people are seeing as they go to get services at Planned Parenthood. I mean, he's actually in the middle of a lawsuit right now that the state attorney general has brought against him for his actions outside Planned Parenthood. They allege that he violated a branch of the Maine Civil Rights Act in terms of the volume that he was protesting at. But the other way is there's a legislative impact. So King's Coalition was behind the push for the most extreme anti-abortion bill in the most recent legislative session. That was LD 975. It would have criminalized abortion. And that bill was ultimately pulled before it ever got to a vote. The bill's sponsor asked the committee to unanimously vote against it. And that was in part Maine Right to Life, their executive director, was actually against this bill as going too far for punishing women. But the goal, and I spoke to a couple of national experts, and they kind of talked about the goal of abolition. These bills are extremely unpopular. They are not likely to pass in most states, but it pulls the conversation farther to abolition. So it's more about kind of pulling the rhetoric to a more extreme anti-abortion stance than necessarily any individual bills passing.
Sounds like a really interesting look into this. Sean, thank you so much for joining us to talk about it.
Thank you.
And you can read the full story and much more at the-maine-monitor.org.